Welcome to Tea Time with Talent Acquisition, the podcast aimed at fostering knowledge and sharing stories within the vibrant talent acquisition community. I'm your host, Eden, and for the next hour or so, I'm going to be joined by an individual who has spent the best part of 8 years interviewing and hiring in a variety of companies across a number of positions. Having worked as both a solo recruiter and a team member, he's enjoyed the best of both worlds the Berlin startup scene has to offer. And taking all that he's learned, he now oversees the recruitment of all business units across Germany, Italy, Poland, and Switzerland, handling end-to-end support and spearheading future hiring plans of his respective company. Tackling the topic of what crafts the perfect or successful interview, shall we say, he's going to share with us what truly makes an interview stand out, what makes it successful, the various techniques that we can deploy to get there, but also the blockers that we should be mindful of so we can either stop doing them today or be mindful to never start them in the future. So when you're ready, grab your favorite tea or coffee if you prefer, and join me in welcoming today's guest, talent acquisition team leader with a team at Shift Move, Milos Boronia. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Eden. Thank you for the introduction. It's lovely to hear when somebody just gives you a resume and wraps up the last, whatever, 6, 8 years of your experience. That is awesome. Thank you.
It's nice when you've got quite an extensive career as well, because I can kind of bounce into different areas. But I love the topic we're going to go through because interviewing is, I mean, we all do it, right? It doesn't matter what level of TA you're at, you've got an interview at some point. So this is going to touch every single listener's ears, I'm sure. And hopefully a lot of people are going to be listening to you going, yeah, I agree. I do that today, and it's more of a reconfirming. But there's going to be some people who maybe might not want to admit it. I think there's going to be a lot of good value we can bring from you today. But before we get into it, I like to start the questions with something completely different, but it kind of segues it slightly. So, from your perspective, Milos, what makes a high performing talent acquisition team?
Collaboration, that is the first thing that comes to my mind. It might sound a bit vague, but when you think about it, like, I mean, exchange of ideas between the teams between the people who are working on very different roles is super important. And just when somebody else gives you perspective on something that you were working on, that is super valuable. And I'm saying that because often, you get to work on a role and you are the only recruiter. That is your own kind
Mm,
of space in your silo, even sometimes, right? So being open to getting perspective is for me super important. And so that's what I'm really trying to also implement in my current team and all of the previous teams that I led is that collaborative aspect. Here's what I think, you know. So saying goodbye to your ego and just, hearing what other people think about what you're doing and how you're approaching it and maybe getting some insights from them. Um, yeah, I would leave it at that. Hopefully, now it's not so vague anymore.
no. I love that point because I'll be honest with you. There was, I mean, not now, but when I first started my career, I really struggled with that. So when I first started, I had some quick success, shall we say, and as any at that point 19-year-old who had some success, I was sitting there thinking, practice, easy, this is easy. But now, obviously, going through different markets and especially the more last, I guess, the last year to 2 years, I think that when you're in a downturn, as we have been, and our team now is obviously quite small, it's really intense working together. I find that having that different perspective just allows you to pull yourself out of the search a little bit, and you can then do a better opportunity or better search for your customer, your stakeholder, whatever. So I think 110% that is such a critical component of successful teams.
Yeah, and as you said, it's not always really easy to do that because you have your own KPIs, you need to prove yourself, especially when you're younger, when you're just starting, there's so much passion, but there's also a bit of competition and et
Mm.
cetera. So yeah, I also remember these times. It wasn't always easy, but it's really important to have that on your mind and to work on that and one day, to get there, to have a team like that. So yeah, that also resonates with me in my beginnings for sure.
So I won't lie, I was actually quite surprised you didn't mention interviewing, or the ability to interview, considering that's the topic you've shared with me. But going into it, right? So when we talk about interviewing, and you use the term, crafting an interview, and when we spoke about this before. You kept on saying successful interviews and being successful there. Um, so how can we determine whether or not an interview is actually truly successful?
This is how I think about it, and the reason maybe why I wanted to talk about it in the first place is because I didn't think we talk about it as often. We do it. That's what we are doing right now. We're having a dialogue, right? Such a mise en abîme, but we don't really think about it as often. So I think it's the most important and the most formative stage of someone's employment. So we are talking about a job interview. We're not talking about an interview that you're giving for media, right? Um, and in that sense, I think about the interviews that I had in the beginning when I started working for Avios, now Shift Move. And often, when things get messy, I'm really connecting it to these first moments. So, that was my formative time with my current company. And I'm always going back to that place. So for me, a successful interview, if you will, is, you know, being able to create that safe space in someone's cognitive map, and, that person coming back to that point and really connecting their entire employment and everything to that. So when you have like a good start, really good foundations, then you can
Mm,
build on top of that. And I'm not talking about like pampering people and telling God knows what and just saying, yeah, it's
yeah.
all brilliant, amazing, but just having a really honest conversation with them, saying this is what we can do, this is what we cannot do.
Mm,
Um, and that moment for me, that is a success. So I have that, and I constantly think about the people who recruited me, um, and I'm really thankful for that experience. So that is for me the reason why I wanted to talk about it. It's because we don't talk about it as often, and I don't understand. I don't think that we in TA teams understand our impact uh, um, enough, and sadly, people are not saying it to us as much as they should.
mm.
And I know it's a bit like, me saying this, this is the most formative time, going a bit out on a limb because this is what I do. And it can sound a bit braggy, but I really do think that from my own personal experience. So that's why it was important for me.
Yeah, no, I think ultimately as well, coming back to there's 2 points you said there. One about I don't think we realize enough the value or the impact that we're having. I think there are pockets of it, and I see it on social media where there's the same type of people, not type, that's the wrong phrase. Actually the same people are, rooting for the industry, and I feel like they're kind of dragging a lot of people along with them, as like followers, because they're like more influential people. But we need more people who believe that we are making the impact because we are. I think someone said it to me the other week about we're the gatekeepers to companies, and it is true. Right? We have the power in our hand to say yes or no to even start a process or to even message somebody. That power is ridiculous to put into hands of very few people. Like if you take a look at all these organizations, Grammarly, Meta, Google, yes, hiring managers can help get people in, but the vast majority of people that enter those companies are through recruiters. Those companies wouldn't be built without recruiters.
Exactly. I mean, we are the glue, not only of
Exactly,
that process,
100%.
but later on, because what I'm trying also to shed light on with our teams, and we have these interview trainings, and we are, constantly talking about it. And I would say employment starts here, not when they sign the contract, not when they start, but when they start talking to any one of us. That's when your employment starts. So
Someone
yeah,
used the phrase
I
with
think
me, sorry to inject. So someone used the phrase, and it really stuck with me. He views the interview process as day zero, and day one is obviously when he first starts. And
there you
that
go.
stuck with me. And and the second point I was going to say is we all talk about candidate experience, and candidate experience is, it's a really buzzwordy topic. But when you boil candidate experience down, there's so many variants to it, and the slice of interviewing is just one small cog in what makes the experience successful for the candidate, for the company, for better or worse. You sign a contract, you don't, but that experience should still be the same, regardless of what the eventual outcome's going to be. So, like I said, that's why I love when you mentioned bring this up because I agree. I don't think it's spoken about enough
Mhm.
about what really makes interviews successful. Um, how much of it do you think is based down to intuition? You interview a lot of people and you become, yeah, that's good, that's not good, or versus the actual measurable outcomes within interviews.
It's a combination. It's always got to be a combination of these things. When you say intuition, I would rather leave it up to. I mean, it's still something that's measurable, and it's still something that we can do. We are working. For example, I'm interviewing you for a job at my company. I know the context. I have the larger picture. I understand the culture. I understand the people. I
Yeah,
understand the nonverbal cues. So all of these things for me, we can label them as intuition, but I still wouldn't leave it at that. Um, I, I think there's still a scientific, if you will, kind of a background to that. It is a little bit more esoteric, and something that's not really quantifiable in numbers and so on. But there is a really solid kind of a scientific background to that as well. Um, and then also your experience. That is a really important part of everything. How experienced you are in assessing people in general. So yes, you need to prepare for a given interview, and you need to start somewhere. Let's say that you're just a young recruiter. You just started. This is your first job. You don't have experience. Maybe you just started within the company. That doesn't definitely help. Then you need to lean on your preparation. But I think it really depends on your stage and where you are. If you've been working with a company, I don't know, for 3, 4 years, and you have a certain experience, great. Then you can maybe tap on that, lean on that. You'll have a bit more confidence. But I think it's really important. So we cannot generalize it. But that's what I'm trying to say. It depends on where you are in your career,
yeah.
who you are, and just try to find a really good mix of all of these things.
I mean, taken from my perspective, so I'm obviously an external recruiter, right? So I see a small slither of what you have access to. I get to see what you tell me, what the hiring manager tells me, what I see online. I have to kind of muddle it together to make kind of a narrative, right? But and I think this is quite interesting because I think you can take this method and do it even as an internal recruiter, and I don't think many do it. I'll be honest with you. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So whenever I bring on a new customer, the first thing we go through is obviously the job requirement. We go through the company. We go through all that side of things, right? But I always say to them, look, the first few profiles, I'm going to throw some curveballs in there, some left wingers, things that you might not have told me. I'm going to start bending the rules a little bit. And not because I'm trying to fit a square peg for a round hole, but because sometimes you don't know what you want until you see it. And what you think you want isn't what you want. So I kind of do that. And I've made hires that on paper, they're like, absolutely not. I'm like, trust me, just have a chat. And they've gone through the distance. So that's my process. But that is based on not knowing really too much about the company at that point. That's based on knowing that I don't want to say gut feeling because that leads to bias, but that's based on intuition. I think there's something right there, but I can't really measure it against the company because I don't really know the company at that point.
Mhm.
Makes sense. So from your side, Milos, what would you say are the most essential elements that contribute to the interview's success from, I guess, preparation all the way through to execution? What are the things we should be focusing on?
I mean, I'm probably going to be speaking from my own perspective, and I didn't just to maybe give a bit of context there. I didn't study psychology. When I started out, people were talking about all of these methods and all of the stuff that I had no clue about, and I constantly had this sort of an imposter syndrome of like, what is all that? But then, I was for some reason successful at it, and I really loved doing it, and I realized that I was still using my experience, and my background is languages. I studied languages. I studied French and Spanish. And throughout my studies, you're constantly focused on writing essays, on choosing the right words, on finding the
Mm,
synonyms, or just really adapting them to make an impact with your words. So the
yeah.
first thing that I'm thinking of, and I know it's a little bit unorthodox, but it's the words actually. So the words that you're choosing to paint the background that you want to give to somebody, um, and because that creates a certain atmosphere, depending on what kind of atmosphere that you want to get, you go for that synonym or that word, and just the adaptability of your vocabulary for me is super important because you might be talking to so many different profiles and different roles. So I remember last year I was working on a CRO role and a receptionist role and everything else in between. And so you can imagine that it's a different lingo, different vocabulary, different um, everything basically. And what you want to do, you want people to relate to you. You want to be relatable because again, you're the glue of this process. You're giving people an introduction, so you want them to relate to you. So adapting your vocabulary to different situation and profiles and so on for me is super useful and something that I realized that I was actually using from my experience and that helped me a lot. And if you think about also the common expressions that we are using and that we think we have to, like, what is your notice period? I'm sure there's like plenty of ways to ask a question that became such a commonplace. My team sent me a TikTok recently about like all of these corporate lingos that we are constantly using, like break down the silos. At one point, when you realize that it became a commonplace and a mockery, move away from it. Like go for
Circle
something
back.
that's a little
That's a good one.
go for something that's a little bit more relevant or that's
Mm.
not such a commonplace because you want to relate to that person. Um, so think about the commonplaces, think about the words.
That's obviously leads into rapport building, right? And tailoring your approach to different, I guess, different people and personalities and situations. And I like the fact you use completely contrasting jobs because I do tech recruitment, but yes, I might be asked to find a salesperson for for something that I can help out. And it's little things about just because you specialize doesn't mean you can't support various other things, or it
Yeah.
shouldn't, in my opinion. Um, what other, I guess, I would call them, and I think you would probably summarize as basics, right? These are the absolute minimum standards that we should be trying to do in every single interview. And obviously, rapport building, effective communication comes into that. But what other elements would you say, from your experience, kind of people might be lacking or not tapping into as much that you think we should be?
But talking about some of the basics, I think giving a good introduction is really important because, as I said, you are the glue. So make sure that the person is getting properly onboarded. Think about
Yeah.
an onboarding. So that could be an onboarding. Having a clear agenda when you start the conversation with somebody, like this is what I want to cover today. I would like to ask you this. This is what I would expect from you. And that's something that I always do when I'm speaking with people, just to bring a little bit more of clarity and to ease the tension, let's say, because it can be such a it contrived, situation. It's like entering an Uber, you know nothing about the person driving you, and you need to have a good conversation with them. So it's not just taking you from A to B. You gotta engage in a conversation. You maybe need to sell, maybe need to all of these little things, right? So um, that I think is really important to ease the tension. And thinking also about the basics. I think we mentioned the introduction preparation is important. So preparing your questions, but not sticking maybe too rigidly to them, and
Mm.
maybe in advance thinking about some of the segues, like looking at the conversation that you want to have today, looking at the things that you need to assess and to cover. How can I make this conversation fluid? How can I make it a
Mm.
little bit more organic? What are the possible segues? It's no way that you can predict everything, and that's the beauty of it. And that's why it's also, problematic for so many people. But again, that's also the beauty of it, and that's why some people love it. It's because it's unpredictable, and you need to leave some space for it. But certainly, you can maybe predict how to make a better segue, just to make it more fluid. You want to have that flow, and I think having an authentic, organic conversation for me is super super important. Did I forget any of the things that you mentioned? I don't remember
That I
the.
mentioned that you mentioned. No, no, no. I mean, there's a few things that I'd touch upon, and one of those elements is, I guess, having that flow, right? You have it's quite a checklist, right? We will have these are things I need to understand from this call, from my perspective as an interviewer. How can I then stay present in that interview without trying to think? And again, we've all fallen fault of this, I'm sure, without trying to understand what they're going to say, so I know what I'm going to say next. It's going to lead to this, it's going to lead to that, and you forget really important information, or you forget things that could yield the result a lot quicker. We're an on-site team. They want hybrid as a preference. Okay, well, there's your option. You know it's not going to work preference-wise. It could be a kind of pull the parachute at that sort of moment. So how can we do that? how can we upskill in that, shall we say?
The first thing I think you should really, in order for you to be present, close all of the things that you have open, Stacks, the
Mm.
LinkedIn, people pinging you and so on. And right now, we're doing this. We're uploading a video. I'm looking at is it working? I can see you. Is the sound on? Is it good? So there's so many distractions. And at one point, I'm realizing, let it go. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Like you can do it, or you can, you know what I mean. But
Yeah.
I can tell you from, what we are doing at the moment, it is the same thing. There are always so many distractions. So just try to overcome them. Is it easy? No, it's not really easy, but you have to keep working on that. So I think that is super important. And you sometimes want to anticipate speaking about, the questions. So I ask you a question, you're answering it. I want to anticipate certain elements of it, but not too much. Again, finding a good balance and good measure. You say something, it triggers me, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, maybe I can ask you that. But okay, come back, come back, come back. Planet Earth. I need to be here. I need to be present. So is it always easy? No, it's not an easy job. And you have to circle back a lot. And, inside your brain, it seems like we're just, conversing. We're just having casual conversations. But here, it's like so many variables and so many things that are happening, which again is normal. But you know, what I'm always thinking of, come back. Come back. If you have another thought, it's fine. Don't feel stressed about it. It's perfectly normal that you have these distractions in your brain when you're speaking to anybody in your life. But just come back. Show respect to that person who is saying something.
Mm.
Um, just that. It's something that I also need to keep reminding myself of every day, even now. Yeah.
The other point I was thinking as you were talking there about, moving it through a flow conversation. My colleague does this really well, and he always says to people, look, straight up, this isn't an interview, it's a discussion. There's an
Yes.
opportunity. Let's just forget the opportunity for a second. Let's just talk about you. And if it matches, we'll talk about the company. If it matches, we go further forward. And it's having that really open, honest dialogue. You said at the beginning, obviously being honest quite early on. I think that needs to kind of, if you set the tone like that straight away, you can almost see it sometimes with some candidates. They just sit and go, it's like the world's just like lifted off their shoulders a little bit, because especially in the current market, it's super stressful. No one wants to be
Mm.
sitting doing interviews that make it more stressful. Just have a chat, and you never know where it's going to lead.
Exactly. It's having a conversation is just opening doors. And if it's not for you, if it's not for the other person, it's totally fine. Just move on. But just as
Yeah.
you said it, it's also a bit of networking. It's a bit of exercising. So just easing the tension for people. And I think like 21st century, let's just move away from intimidating candidates and just like asking all of these random weird questions. I never
Yeah.
got it. I don't get it now. And I think whoever is doing it, like send this to your hiring manager. They should not be doing stuff like this anymore in the 21st
Yeah, no, I
century.
agree.
So safe space
The
uh, is important.
I'll be honest with you, I do still see it sometimes, and
I know.
it's not because the person wants to bully them. I see it more from an ego flex, and I see it usually from junior members. Either junior members, not necessarily in talent acquisition, but it definitely happens, or people who've just stepped up into a leadership role, or maybe you and I were on the same level. You're coming in at a lead role. I'm trying to flex my knowledge to you, so I'm going to put questions that I know really well to you, and then it happens so much more than you think. I mean, again, from the technical perspective, that's where I'm coming from. It happens way more than I'd like it to, and that's just ego. It's just sure what it
Exactly.
is. It's ego, which is
Yeah,
frustrating. But that also kind of comes into emotional nuances, I guess, because they can play a role. I mean, at least I think. But tell me if I'm wrong from your perspective. But how can we train ourselves to actually notice the emotional nuances in ourselves, because that's the part that's making the decision about this individual. And when I'm talking about emotional nuances, just to kind of throw a couple at you, just to set what I've seen is, we've had conflict around the world, and somebody who's interviewing somebody else has allowed that to seep into that process. The company could have potentially lost out on someone who's fantastic over something that has something to do with people outside of the working environment, right? Again,
mm,
I understand the situation. Same thing with, I guess, gender, from anything that kind of comes into that. There's all these feelings of ourselves I've seen people allow it to bleed out into an interview process, and people have lost out because of it. So That's the question: is how do we train ourselves to notice this and to not let it take over?
It's the holy grail. Do therapy, a lot of therapy. It's healthy. I did it, a lot of it. It's good for you. Coaching, it helps, Uh, but these things aside, that are of course healthy for all of us. I think when we were talking about the ego and just the kind of wanting to prove yourself and wanting to be on top of everything, um, yeah, it is important not to have that kind of overbearing presence in a discussion with somebody, because it's a dialogue and you just
Yeah.
want to converse. And uh, there is something, when I mentioned the Uber example, it got me thinking also about when I was in a car with a friend of mine, and it's so funny because being in a car with somebody is a secluded space, right? So you are kind of, there's only the two of you, and it's a secluded space, and you can feel everyone's energy. You don't need to say anything, but you just feel it. And I remember that my friend told me, like, I feel so much pressure now because I feel like you're looking at me, and I feel like I could make a tiny little mistake now because I just feel like the tension. And I was like, no, what are you? I'm just sitting here, like, chilling.
Yeah.
I
What
don't.
tension? That's
What are you talking
perception.
about? I'm the coolest person in the world, you know. And then it got me thinking, not immediately, but like a few years after, I was constantly mulling it over in my head and thinking, like, why would he say that? I just, wow, whatever. And then I realized that yes, I was OCDing about everything. I was looking and judging. And the reason behind it is because I was nervous. I didn't want to get into a car crash. I didn't want to get killed. I was nervous. I didn't want to be in the car. But that's the thing. If you decide to be in that car with that person, you need to give away your power, because that's a
Mm.
decision that you make, and you need to leave everything, your dominant side, your ego, whatever you want to call it. You need to leave it aside. The only other thing that you can do is not be there. If you want to be there, then you need to do it that way. And it took me years to kind of understand that. And I think recently, yes, and it's only because recently somebody told me that like they feel really, you know relaxed being, with me being their shotgun. Be somebody's shotgun. That's how you can practice this. Um, and I felt that was the one of the best compliments that somebody gave me. And I'm like, the years of work on myself, and talking
It's
about
coming
my
back.
ego. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that got me thinking about that example. And only then I realized, and I was like, aha, that was really the aha moment for me. So it's everywhere. It's in your discussions with your partner, with your family, with your friends. You need to detect and label these things. I don't sadly have a golden formula for it. You just have to come to that realization. Um, but look for it. That's at least what I can tell you. Yeah.
I like that point because I think this is also quite an interesting conversation in the sense of if you're somebody that's listening and simply do not like interviewing people, then you're in the wrong job because it's such a critical part of our job. And it's little things like that. I think these discussions, they're not just about trying to upskill people, but also getting people to realize this isn't for them or it is for them. And I love interviewing people, hence why I do it for a living. And ironically, now I do it for a podcast as well. Like, I love learning about people. I love finding things out. And that is just, for me, it's just all what all this is about. And if it leads to jobs, it leads to jobs. If it doesn't, then it leads to some really good takeaways for everybody. And that's why I like that side of things. But if you don't enjoy that and you feel nervous and you don't, you're not willing to work on the things that say, put my ego to one side, put my emotional drivers to one side for the betterment of a company, then it's never going to work.
Yes, and I feel you, and I heard it so many times from people, like, I just want to get out of the interviews. I just want to get out of these calls. And I feel like it's the wrong mindset. Not necessarily that that's the person in the wrong job, but that just they have a slightly different mindset, and maybe they need to ease the pressure for themselves as the interviewers, and to come into that conversation just wanting to talk to the other person, because you're thinking, I need to fill this. I need to fill in my scorecard. Who's going to be reading my scorecard? This needs to be
Mm.
perfect. It needs to be brilliant. I'm going to be judged. All of these, little things that you do to yourself for no particular reason, instead of just, let's do the dance. Let's just talk to Eden, and if I make a fool out of myself, fine. I'll live.
think that comes back to it though, when you said earlier about not understanding the impact we have. I think that kind of comes somewhat to that. If you don't feel valued or that you're driving impact, you're going to look at the minute detail of my scorecard, who's reading it, instead of this person isn't right today, but they've got a wicked profile, could be right for such and such team in 6 months' time. That's where I'll be sitting there. And again, I think that also comes back with experience to sit there and feel comfortable going back to your manager or to your high managers and saying, look, you've only got one profile for me this week. I've done all this behind the scenes and no one else was right. So that's the one profile we're moving forward with. Let's go get that one person. You only need one. That's why I keep saying to everyone, you only need one, right? Unless you hire more than one, then you need more than one, obviously, but you know what I mean. But I think that's the
Yeah,
experience side of feeling comfortable interviewing and kicking back. It's a different
it,
conversation entirely.
it is, and this job is challenging people. It can be very challenging because I mean, I'm talking to you. You can see stuff, like you can see if that person is open for dialogue or not. You can see my ego and like all of these little things that are challenging us constantly, that are there on the display. Everybody sees them and we have to work on them. And you mentioned bias. It's also, one of these things we constantly have to work on our bias. And it's one of the I mean, speaking about bias, that can be just a separate conversation and so on. But for the sake of this one, I would say what's really important is that so many times we expect candidates and just people that we talk to validate our assumptions. You go to your friend about a problem, about anything, you want them to validate your assumptions. They should be challenging them, and you should be open to other people challenging your assumptions. And I think bias comes down to that. Somebody not confirming what you want to hear. There's thousands types of biases, and maybe I would leave that to somebody who's really is a psychologist.
Yeah, I was
Um,
going to say, if someone does listen to this and does want to talk about bias with me, because I have a very strong opinion about bias, and I would very much like to have a healthy debate about this. Um, but you, as you said, it's an entire topic to its own. Sorry, I would love to have a healthy debate about that. It is a positive thing, by the way. I know I sound, as I'm saying that, I know I sound a bit like like an argumentative individual about that topic, but I think there's more that needs to be done. Let's say that. So someone please message me. With yourself, Milos, obviously the basics, let's say once they're covered, we've got a wicked introduction. We truly understand what we're doing. We are communicating effectively. We're choosing our words effectively. The tonality, I know we haven't touched upon it, but obviously comes into it. You know, we're being present in the moment. We're doing all the active listening. We're taking the emotional charge out of it, right? What are some of the advanced techniques that have led you to have hyper successful interviews? And I'm hoping to kind of uncover some of the things that maybe you've trialed and tweaked along the way, and now you're kind of at a place where you know for a fact this is the style that I go for, this is how I do it. So can I peer into your brain a little bit there?
to be honest, I think I already mentioned the few of these things that are maybe important for me and that I am doing. I am really just trying to establish a rapport with the people that I'm speaking with, as simple as that. Like I'm just there for the conversation. That's all. And I'm constantly trying to make it a flow. I try to find all of these little segues. Maybe something that, it's completely funny, but I don't know if you were doing that when you were kids. You're just like playing this interview game. Somebody's like, you're pretending that you're a celebrity and one of your friends is interviewing you. I don't know if you
I
ever
won't
done
lie,
that.
I used to play with sticks and pretend I was part of Lord of the Rings. So not the interviewing type as a child, more of the jumping out of trees, annoying my mum with grass stains and mud stains every day. Sorry, mum.
Okay. Yeah, so there you go. It's only me, sorry. And as much as it's embarrassing, it is something that again, it was in my formative years. So I did that with my friends, and we were just like playing around with it. And for some reason, that felt really natural for me. Just doing that. Of course, it's different. I need to be assessing people, and I need to do it on the way. Um, but just you know, having a really open conversation with somebody and just not thinking about anything else, not feeling the pressure, not thinking, what is it that I need to do? What is it that I need to bring to, I don't know, my hiring manager, my CEO? There's so many variables that are in the game, but I would just just loving, I just love, leaving all of these variables aside. And I remember my team would join me sometimes for these calls, and they would be like, how is this person going to know that you will be rejecting them? And I said, they will know when I reject them. Why do they need to
Mm.
know on the spot? I don't need to be giving them little hints that it's going to be a game over. I want them to have a good conversation because later in a few weeks' time, it can be very useful.
Yeah.
Um, so that is something
So
that in
you don't
general,
reject people straight away on the call. Just curiosity.
usually I don't do that. Usually I don't do that because it did happen when it's super clear. And I think we are in a different game, right? So when you do it
Mm.
externally, it's different because it's a different thing. But in my position, I am representing also the brand. I am representing the company. So all of these things are important. And when you think about candidate experience, right, it starts with you. It starts right there. If it's clearly not a fit, then yes, we can be open about it and we can discuss. Um, but giving people that good experience, um, for me was always like something that that always paid off. It was always good and never had any negative reaction based on that. Nobody complaining, and et cetera, et cetera. So a good, organic, authentic conversation, even though you won't share the feedback immediately, but maybe, speak to them later.
Mm.
For me was always the golden rule.
The question of advanced techniques, I won't lie, I did kind of want to trip you over a little bit. I wanted to see if there was a golden piece of Milos information that we could have, but actually I prefer your answer because there doesn't need to be advanced technique. I think the further you go in a career, the further you go in anything, everyone's looking for like what's that one piece of advice that just unlocks this treasure trove of information, but it's not. And we talk about it all the time. It's back to basics. Well, there's fundamental basics to everything. Nail them, you're successful.
Mhm.
Then you can add in little bits, little tricks along the way, fine. But as long as you do the basics, have a good conversation,
Mm.
represent the company, good communication. As long as you hit those every time, that yields success.
Definitely. And I was thinking also about, when you asked me like, who, I don't have one. But it's the thing I think that I mentioned also in the beginning. It's the thing about the words that for me,
Yeah.
that was something that I just didn't realize people around me were doing a lot. So being conscious of the things that I'm using and, trying to create an atmosphere with them. Apart from that, to be honest, I don't have the magic kind of formula or anything that I can pass on to other people. Um,
Well, I think
but
you have though. That's the thing, right? You've shared your formula, which is the basics, without saying this is the blueprint of doing it. It's like everything that you've just covered for the last 20, 25 minutes is your formula, and your formula is just ensuring you're nailing the basics. And it's teachable. That's the important thing. Is that it doesn't matter what role it is, what company you're in, what the background of someone is. Those basics are teachable to every single person. So there's
mm,
no reason why we can't all have successful interviews. So I think you're right. I mean, if you want to bottle it up and take it to Bikini Bottom and with SpongeBob, then you can. It's the secret formula. Um, I used to watch SpongeBob as a kid, clearly. Um, I am curious. Obviously, with success comes issues of us getting there, right? Blockers, as I said at the introduction. What are some of the most common mistakes that you see interviewers are unknowingly making?
mm. We mentioned, and I think already quite a few of them. The thing that we mentioned is listening. I don't think we talked about it maybe as much as we should have. Anticipating questions, yes, is important, but again, it's not good really when you're not present. So some of the things that could really help you there. I know mirroring is one of the techniques that some people are using, and just like I want to mirror what you said. I want to show you exactly. So yeah, there you go. I don't do it I do it sometimes. I don't like it to be too contrived. Um, but I just want to wrap up what somebody said. I want to make sure that I understood correctly. I
I
want to make sure
100%
that
think that
we
one.
are exactly on the same page. So listening and showing to people with this, you can just really show to people that you've been listening to them. And so I think not doing that, not listening is one of the really big blockers, and I've seen it with from the recruiters to C-levels. When they have an interview, I clearly know when they did not listen to the person that they were speaking to. So that for me is a thing, and also time management, right? So if let's say that you have whatever 40, 30, 60 minutes, it doesn't matter. You need to present people with a clear agenda, and you need to track the time that you have. So again, these are maybe some of the basics. And coming back to what we said again, people who are not open to a dialogue. If you're not open to a dialogue, then it's game over. I can just come here and I can ask you questions, and I'm expecting you to confirm what I said and to say what I want to hear. But if I'm not in the first place open to have a dialogue with you, um, then yes, I need to work on that, or I need to do something else.
Find the former of not wanting to have a dialogue. I find that often happens, from my own experience, in really quick moving scale up. And as much as people are gonna probably argue against it for me, I'm like, no, we want to build the right culture. I disagree. I've seen it time again where you've got a target of 30 PHP developers, and I see like just talent teams just cycling through job after advert after advert after advert just to get through the numbers. And it's not the TA's fault in that instance. It's because the targets are so high, the team isn't supported enough, and you just have to get bums on seats. And I've seen it, and Berlin was awful for it for years and years and years. And that's why Berlin has now been hit so hard with layoffs, because these companies have just exploded with people that weren't needed in the first place because of ego from the uppers that be. But then seeing it from really small companies, or for example, I do take Shift Move, although I haven't worked with your team, your former team, also before, obviously Shift Move with Vimcar that I used to work with. We never had that boom when I was working with them, and it was really specific hiring. And it would be like one or two hires at a time, and it was really manageable, and you can find good people. And ironically, people end up being there for years, and I think still some of the people I hired are still with you now under Shift Move. So there's that element of like trying to be present in every single interview, no matter the situation. I understand it's so tough, but it's so important to be successful. I just don't see it, unfortunately.
Sadly, no. And again, what you mentioned, that's a completely that depends on your organization. So if you have an organization that is just like bam, 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 just hiring people, not caring about anything else, then yes, I understand. It is difficult to be present, and sometimes maybe not even wanted.
Yeah.
Like maybe your company doesn't care about it. Sadly, that is sometimes also the case. So if you can influence people that you work with, maybe your managers or whoever is leading the TA or and so on, it is important to do that. Of course, I mean there are limits to it. We can also give feedback and impact the strategy to a certain extent. You cannot change it yourself. And then it's important to understand if you can work within these limitations. If you can't, then you need to find something that's maybe more suitable for the values that you want to follow. I've been speaking from maybe a very privileged position today because yes, I do have the luxury of doing that because that is the environment that I have and the values that I can follow here. In that sense, yes, it is a privileged position. I wasn't always in one, and I understand how it works. But again, if you can impact your teams, do it. And don't feel too bad if your environment is requesting you to do that sometimes. What we also need to understand is that it's a job, right? So you cannot always change the world. If for the time being that's what you need to do, then do it. But want something different, work on getting that thing that's different, try to make an impact. I think it's still important.
Yeah. Well, Milos, thank you so much for spending some time. So if someone wanted to continue the conversation with you, connect with you, learn from you a bit further, where's the best place that they can find you?
LinkedIn. They can just drop me a message on LinkedIn and do that. Happy to talk to people who are willing to continue this conversation because it's really an interesting one. And I've been also thinking about a lot of things that we said just now that really resonate with me, and I'm going to continue talking with myself in my head for the next hour because it's a very interesting topic, and I still love it, and I'm passionate about it. So yeah, whoever wants to continue the conversation, let me know. And thank you,
I'll
Eden.
put
It was
your.
a
No,
brilliant
I
talk.
appreciate it. I appreciate you spending some time with us. I'll pop your LinkedIn into the description of this video, and obviously people then can come find you. But me, I genuinely mean it. Like I said, find interviewing such an interesting topic because I have so many people want to speak about candidate experience, and we have, and we talk about such a broad perspective. But I've only had two people talk about interviewing, and we've had one speak about training hiring managers, and you're the only person who's spoken about interviewing from the perspective of talent teams. Out of so far, by the time we've recorded this, I think 45 conversations, which just
Mm.
goes to show how minimal people want to talk about this topic. So I genuinely do appreciate you bringing it to light. So thank you for it. And yeah, thank you so much. Hopefully we'll have the chance to collaborate in a future episode again with a new idea. But thank you so much.
Would love to. Thank you, Eden. Thank you for the conversation. Really enjoyed it, and yeah, hope to see you soon.
Perfect.
Ciao, ciao.